Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris. I'm an adult services librarian here at Simsbury Public Library, and I'm excited to welcome you to tonight's event, Craving Preservation, Simsbury's Edible History and Historic Landmarks. I am joined this evening by Sarah Wasberg Johnson, the food historian, who is joining us out of Yonkers, New York, Taylor Kinsler of NBC Connecticut, and Chef Chris Prosperi of Metro B. Please join me in welcoming them to the library. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Chef Tyler Anderson is not with us this evening, but I'm confident that we'll have enough content in order to fill a very cool program. Just a brief thank you to a few people. This event would not have been possible without Ika Scully. All of the information that you provided for the Ensign House, your knowledge, your passion for preservation and sharing that with us, we wouldn't have been able to do this without you. So thank you so much, Barbara Strong of the Simsbury Historical Society, for providing collections to us, walking us through step by step how to kind of help put this together, and providing an amazing display up in the Historical Society case upstairs. She's gonna hate me for this, but my colleague Sin over in the corner, this would not have been possible without all of the legwork and everything that you did to make it happen, so thank you. This program is partially funded by a grant by CT Humanities, and it is co-sponsored by the Simsbury Historical Society. So without further ado, Taylor, take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? I am so excited to be here tonight. So I've lived in Simsbury the last few years, and everyone always talks about how this community constantly shows up for one another, and I think that tonight is a beautiful example of that. So thank you all for being here. I want to give a shout out to Pat Carbone, who is basically my adopted grandmother. I haven't seen her in a hot minute, and so she is what I call the heart and soul of Simsbury, the Simsbury queen, the volunteer queen. She's right here. Give Pat a round of applause. She is a wonderful human being. I love you, Pat. Okay, now that I'm done with my shout outs. So as Chris mentioned, my name is Taylor Kinsler. I host NBC Connecticut's morning lifestyle show, CT Live. And I am not a food expert, but I eat a lot of food on television. and I just adore it because food brings me so much joy. But more importantly, the stories behind some of our favorite dishes that we know and we love, that really excites me. And so I'm so fortunate tonight to be next to Sarah Wasberg Johnson, who has my dream job. It's one of her hobbies, a food historian, which is the coolest thing ever. And she has such a great presentation for us later in the evening. And one of my favorite chefs in Connecticut, Chris Prosperi, who is the first chef that I actually met when I moved to Connecticut in 2018 to launch CT Live. We did one of the first interviews for the show with him and have continued to do so ever since. And so he is my go-to source when it comes to anything in the restaurant industry. And a lot of people have said to me over the years, what's so special about Connecticut? And my job is literally to travel around the state and find just that. There is so much happening here, especially in the restaurant industry. There are some really incredible chefs who are innovating, going above and beyond to support local, use those ingredients to make really unique items. Chris does that every single day at his restaurant. I'm constantly learning from him, even though I've known him for 5 years and he has made so many recipes on our show. I am constantly learning from him and so many others in the industry. And so I'm really excited to celebrate what makes the restaurant industry so special, but more importantly, just food in general and the history behind it. I was thinking about it when I was driving here today, and I feel like shared meals, they're just the ultimate connector, right? Food brings people from all walks of life together. There's so many great stories that happen over sometimes the most simple dish, right? And sometimes they happen in buildings that are right across the street from here. And we're going to learn so much about them tonight. So Chris, I want to start with you. I would love to know what led you to Simsbury.
Yeah, that's a long time ago now. We're actually, I'm reminded every day when I walk into the Ensign House in Metro Beast, there's a big sign that says it's our 25th year this year. So we have to go back to 1998, and I was a young chef in Connecticut. I'm originally from New York, but I always wanted to open a restaurant, and I always wanted to open a restaurant in Connecticut. We summered here as kids, and I just fell in love with the state. Unfortunately, we were in Litchfield County, and I kept looking at the restaurants there, and it wasn't the bright business model that I wanted to do because it's more seasonal. So Courtney and I got in the car, and we literally drove town to town to town. And we just kept stopping in at little restaurants. And I don't know, we did this for probably 4 years. And we hit most of the towns in Connecticut, but we kept coming back to the Farmington Valley. And we found this little breakfasty lunch place for Sundays that we absolutely loved. And it was called Metro Bis. And we ate there probably 10 Sundays in a row this one year. And we got to know the owners, and it wasn't for sale. It was just this cool little French bistro decorated like my grandmother's house in Paris. My grandmother's actually from Paris. And it reminded me of that, and it really felt like home. So talking to the owners, every time we came in, they got to know us, and we're like, and they finally asked us, like, what are you doing in this area? And we're like, well, we're looking for a restaurant. And we had already, at this point, we already looked at a couple places in town. And he said, Claude, the old owner, was like, hold on a second, I'll be right back. And he brought out his partner, Kathy at the time. And she's like, you know what? We might be interested in selling at this point. Would you be interested in buying this place? And I don't know how many people remember, we call it Metro One now. Because we've been in 3 different locations. But Metro One was in Simsbury Town Shops where Popover is now. Another great restaurant. And that's where we started in 1998. It took us a while to put the deal together, but yeah, we lasted there for 15 years. It was a great experience. It was a beautiful little bistro. We still miss it to this day, some aspects of it. It was such a tiny little place, and it was so loud, but it had this little energy going. And that was the start. Crazy, right? 25 years.
That is amazing. And the building that you are in today is absolutely incredible. And we'll get to more of that when we do Sarah's presentation. But I would love for you to even share just the story that you told me about someone who went for a wedding, or they were coming for their anniversary.
Oh, yeah. It's when we first moved. And I didn't know, because it was a quick move, right? We were only at the 1820 house for 5 years. And we didn't even plan on moving. We were just settling in over there. Anyway, so when we moved finally, it was like such a quick move. We didn't really do the best job of letting people know we were moving because we were so into the move. So here we are, we're moving stuff like almost every day at this point, and we get a reservation for a couple who was coming in. And I remember it saying anniversary dinner, okay, whatever, but we'll be at the new place. No big deal. But we didn't know. So it was probably our second weekend in the new place. And we opened, I don't know if you remember, we opened it in stages, right? So when we first opened it, we only had the one dining room, which was the chapel, which at that point, I was still reeling with just finding out that it was a chapel, because I always thought it was our bank. But it had a preview, right? I mean, it was Webster Bank forever, from 98 until we moved in. It was always in my mind the bank. So we found out it was a church, and that was kind of in my head, but not a lot yet. Anyway, so this couple comes in, and she's crying at the table. And I think it's because we moved. And, so I go out and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And she's crying. She's like, you don't understand. We made this reservation. And back then we were 2 entities, right? So if you made a reservation to stay at the 1820 house, you called the 1820 house. And if you wanted to make a reservation in Metro Bis, you called a separate number. So they're like, you don't understand. We made a reservation at the 1820 house. We didn't know you moved. And now I'm really feeling bad. I'm like, I know we didn't tell people, it was such a fast move and we were so caught up in it. And she goes, no, these are tears of joy. You don't understand. We got married in this room. Right? And I'm like, excuse me? And she's like, yeah, you don't understand. This is where we got married. We thought we were having our anniversary dinner at the 1820 house, and we were coming back to Simsbury because this is where we got married. We didn't know we were going to have dinner in the chapel where we got married. So that opened up this oh my gosh, I got to find out more about what this place was.
Which I think is why tonight is so special, because I just can't wait to learn. I think I know a lot about the restaurant industry in Connecticut in general. I have no idea, even just the 5 minutes that I've been chatting with these two. So I'm excited to learn tonight. But I think that really highlights too just how powerful a shared meal can be with connecting to the community, but also what you have built means to these people. As you've been talking right now, I can see everyone's faces lighting up because they remember a moment, a story, a connection to the 3 buildings that you've been in over the years, right? What does that mean to you?
Oh, you know what? It's funny because if I think back to when we first moved here, we were outsiders. We didn't know. I mean, we knew the people that ran the building that we were in, the mall, and that was it. We didn't know anybody here. So we were starting from nothing. And now 25 years later, I feel like this is my home. Yeah.
Well, now I feel like everybody says Chris, and immediately it's, oh, Prosperity. Like you are just, so that's a special thing right there. I have to know, just because I'm curious, and then I'd love to jump into your presentation. What was the one dish for you that changed the way that you approached cooking? Like what dish was just like, you had that aha moment, your eyeballs jumped out of your head, like what was it?
Oh, okay. Then it's when I was a kid.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we grew up in New York, but we had a small cottage in Goshen, right, in Litchfield County. And my parents always tell the story, like, we moved into Connecticut for a summer house because back in the 60s, everyone that summered from New York City summered in Westchester County, like where you're from, right? I mean, which was weird thinking back, like, wait, you'd go to Rye for the summer? I mean, that's like 10 minutes. So those houses were really expensive. So my parents were frugal, and they were like, we'll just keep driving. The further away from the city, the houses are getting cheaper. And that's how we ended up in Goshen. But it was a farm town in the 60s. So I remember, like, when we were little kids, and I should tell you first, my father's a pastry chef and my mom's a chef. So I grew up in this industry. So there was a farm down the street, the Fay Farm, and she had ducks, geese, and chickens. Mm-hmm. And you could see us walking every Sunday morning after church. We would all four of us, my mom and the three boys, we'd walk from our house down the hill, around the corner to this farm, and we'd see Mrs. Fay, and she would let us get our own eggs. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first time she let me have a goose egg, because we were always making chicken eggs. And if you've ever seen a goose egg, right, it's like, I mean, especially for a little 6-year-old boy, I mean, it was like, I could make, eggs for the whole family with this one egg. And my mom let me make an omelet with that one egg, and that changed. Like, I kind of knew back then that this is what I was going to do. And I look back at that moment saying that's where it all started, going to that farm and hand-picking the goose egg, and she letting me go get it myself.
That's a beautiful thing.
Cool
I know someone who is a big fan of your scrambled eggs and omelets.
Yes.
Pat. I'm just going to keep calling on Pat all night. All right. So now we are going to switch gears and talk to Sarah Wasberg Johnson. She has a great presentation below, and it's called 3 Centuries of Eating in Simsbury. That's a lot of eating.
It's a lot of centuries. Yeah. It was fun to research. So
It is on.
yeah,
Okay.
it is on.
So tell me a little bit more about what went into this research, because this was not a quick Google search.
No.
A lot of time was spent compiling this data, which you were going to share with us today.
Yeah. So, Sin, when did you? It's like months ago, right? Oh yeah. Yeah. So we've been working. I think sometime over the summer. Sin first tracked me down and was like, "Hey, we're doing this program on food and historic preservation." And I was like, "That sounds really cool," not knowing what I was getting myself into. So I'm not from Connecticut. So it was, I live in the Hudson Valley. I'm originally from the Midwest. So it was a learning curve to kind of get up to speed on Simsbury history in particular. But I really felt like we needed to get a feel for the whole town in order to talk about these buildings, because they're connected to a lot of other things that are happening in town. So I may be talking about things you are already familiar with. And if I get anything wrong, I know there's a lot of historians in the audience, so if I get anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. But yeah, I think it'll be a good overview because there's some really interesting trends that are happening across the years. So.
Well, let's dive right in. We can
right.
ask a bunch of questions after, but I'd love to start this presentation.
All right. The hardest part was, there we go. The hardest part was actually finding images, so please bear with me. Can I use the clicker? I can. So I thought we'd start just with kind of a little timeline overview. I found this cool slide in Microsoft PowerPoint, and I was like, this looks fun. Let's put it together. So obviously Simsbury has very early history, so I thought we'd start with Hopbrook Mill, right? The oldest part was built around 1680. And then for our 18th century, we have the Phelps Tavern with Captain Elisha Phelps. building it around 1771. Elisha Phelps is the uncle of the next Elisha Phelps, who builds the 1820 house, right? Which then it gets inherited by, I think, his son-in-law, Amos Eno. Eno, thank you. And then Antoinette Eno inherits it in the 1890s and kind of transforms it into Eaglewood, right? And then we have the Ensign House. It's built in 1906. This was fun. Hot Brick Mill is acquired by the Ensign family in 1917. In the 1850s, which we'll get into more, it was converted into a jute or hemp mill, right, for the Ensign Bickford company. But then in 1917, they converted it back into a grain mill. And I couldn't find a ton of details on it, but my guess is that it's connected to World War I, because wheat was one of the food items that was rationed in World War I. So locally available grain was maybe the reason why that was converted. And then in 1949, the 1820 house becomes Simsbury House, which was a restaurant and inn through to 1960. So this is just kind of our basic overview. These are some of the houses we're going to be talking about a little bit more in detail. So let me click to the next one. So we're going to have some interludes where I'm going to go over some kind of basic Connecticut food history based on like time periods, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically about the buildings. So Connecticut, being one of the original 13 colonies, has very early settlement starting in the 1640s, and Simsbury is founded around 1670. Food in the 17th and 18th centuries is hyper local. If you are not raising or growing your own food, you're getting it from your neighbors or from you're foraging or hunting in the immediate area, right? There were some limited imports, but you're making everything locally, flour, salt sometimes, all of your dairy products, grain, all of your meat, all your vegetables are being produced very locally. You're eating very seasonally, which means that in the wintertime and early spring, you're eating a very monotonous, not very fun diet. You're cooking everything on an open hearth or in a bake oven, right? We don't get stoves until the mid-19th century. So it's very difficult work. And that coincides with the beginning of slavery in Connecticut. So in a lot of household slavery in Connecticut and in the Northeast in general, all of the 13 colonies had slavery prior to the American Revolution. Both New York and Connecticut continued slavery well into the 19th century. And it's different than in the South in that individual households would enslave a couple of people, and we did not have large plantation-style slavery like they did in the South. But there were usually more enslavers per capita in the Northeast than there were in the South because the enslaved population was more widespread. So that brings us to Hot Brick Mill. This is interesting history reading up about this. So it's, even though Simsbury was founded in 1670, they did not have their own mill for the first 8 years, right? So all the locally produced grain had to travel to neighboring mills. So the town got together and basically asked for people to build a grist mill. So we have these four came together to make plans for a grist mill and a sawmill on Hot Brook. And then around 1680, Tuller's Mill, which is another name for Hot Brook Mill, is built. That continues as a grist mill through various owners until the 1860s, when it's purchased by Joseph Toy of, was it Toy, Ensign, Bickford? At that point, no, it's not Ensign yet.
No.
The Bickford Company. We'll just call it the Bickford Company because it changes names a bunch of times. Toy Bickford, thank you. To produce hemp or jute, yarn, or thread for use in their safety fuses. And then, as I said, J.R. Ensign, 1917 is actually when J.R. Ensign's father passes away, and he, that same year, converts the mill back to a grist mill. Again, my theory is to coincide with World War I. Ceases operation as a grist mill in the 1950s. And then I was expecting Chef Tyler to be here, so I did not do the more recent history. So Chris, maybe you can, if you know the more recent history of when it becomes a restaurant, do you know off the top of your head when it turns into a restaurant? I didn't write it down. Okay.
I think 60s or 70s is
Okay.
when it first opened. 80s? Was it Hopbrook Tavern? Yeah. So that was the first one, Hopbrook Tavern in the 80s.
Okay. Thank you.
We should make you our other panelist.
Yeah, there we go. I told you guys would probably know more about some of this history than I did. So this beautiful photo from the Connecticut Historical Society was taken around 1915. So this would have been just before the mill was converted back into a grist mill. Gorgeous. It's on their website if anybody wants a high-resolution copy. And then this is just another view of a different part of the mill. It's an undated image, but I thought tried to have as many pictures as possible. So that brings us to the 18th and early 19th century, and of course I have to have Newgate Prison on there. This is actually, this was published in London in 1781, which is in the middle of the American Revolution, as anti-rebel propaganda. Although I don't know what was that propagandic about it because it was true, but this is, it was to kind of show like we're the housing loyalist prisoners, right, and kind of bring fervor against the rebels. Anyway, so we're still very self-sufficient in our food production. The Northeast, Connecticut in particular, is very well known for beef production. A lot of livestock in this period, because this is time before railroads, livestock is produced fairly locally, and then it is transported on the hoof, right? So you're moving. It's like cattle drives. Cowboys date to this time period too. But we're used to think of that in the West. That's part of the mid-19th century expansion of railroads. So in the Northeast, originally, you also had cattle drives and cowboys. And because we have very Anglo-Saxon food roots in New England, we're obsessed with beef, right? So that becomes a big thing. We're still eating primarily at home, although in the early 19th century, as we're urbanizing, we do start to get some catering and some public houses, taverns, that kind of thing. And then we have early industrialization. Simsbury in particular, I was very interested to learn, industrializes quite early for this region, particularly in the early 19th century, late 18th, early 19th century, are getting mills. There's a lot of water-powered mills, not just grist mills and sawmills, but also manufacturing mills happening, and then also copper mining in Newgate. So tavern culture brings us to the Phelps Tavern. Even though this is not one of our featured houses for tonight, it has some connections to the 1820 house, so I thought I would just go over it quickly. So as I said, built in 1771 by Captain Alicia Phelps, and it remained a tavern for quite a good run. It's 1786 is when Noah Phelps gets his first tavern license. He runs until his death in 1817. His wife Charlotte runs it for a couple of years, and then her son Jeffrey takes over. And it really starts to take off when the Farmington Canal opens, because the tavern was like basically right on the canal. So as we're kind of improving our transportation infrastructure and people are traveling more, you're getting more eating outside of the home. People are looking for taverns, for inns, for places to get a hot meal, a place to stay. Often they were just like the front room of somebody's house, right, which is basically what happened with the Phelps Tavern. But Farmington Canal was a relatively short-lived canal, so in the 1840s, as the canal traffic was starting to decline, that's when they eventually closed the tavern. And then it becomes a private family home until 1960, when it's acquired by the Simsbury Historical Society. This is what it looks like. I don't have a date for this photo. It's early 20th century. And then I thought this is very interesting. I'll talk a little bit about this as we get into our 20th century history, but there was a big colonial revival period starting in the 19-teens and 20s, and then kind of continuing in waves until the bicentennial. But this is, these two images, here's the Phelps Tavern woodwork here, featured in the early domestic architecture of Connecticut some 1924, and then also that same author did some some interesting, gosh darn it, some interesting scale drawings in Architecture magazine. So just kind of some fun references. I was talking with Chris about this. He asked me what was my most interesting fact I learned in this research. And that is the dichotomy of Simsbury and the temperance movement. So for those of you who are not familiar with the temperance movement is an anti-alcohol movement. It starts in the early 19th century as Americans are shifting away from lower alcohol beverages like beer and hard cider and wine and toward distilled alcohol as distilleries start to be built. Grain distillery, like distilling alcohol from grain, is one of the most cost-effective ways to make money from grain in areas that are not well supplied by transportation. So like the Whiskey Rebellion is related to not wanting to pay alcohol tax on your grain because you're turning it into whiskey because that's much more cost effective. So Simsbury has a very early gin distillery that opens in 1804. Why is it? It's because I'm leaning on this, that's why. Sorry, we'll go backwards. They have a gin distillery in 1804, and then in 1805, one of the first temperance societies in the country starts, the Aquatic Society, right here in Simsbury. So I was like, I wonder if there's a connection. Guess what? I bet there is. So it kind of remains a center of temperance activity, even though this gin distillery continues to operate. Again, probably a connection. And in 1916, the town of Simsbury goes officially dry. And there were actually some court cases where people got arrested for bringing alcohol into the town because Simsbury is a dry town and you can't sell alcohol in a dry town. And then, of course, the whole country goes dry in 1920, but Simsbury is an early adopter. And the Progressive era is a big time for the temperance movement in general. There's like some nativist, xenophobic, racist connotations with that against immigrant connections to alcohol, cultural alcohol consumption, but definitely a big part of the Progressive era and trying to like clean up cities and stuff like that. So I just thought it was very interesting that Simsbury had like these two very dichotomous things happening at the same time. All right, so that brings us to the 1820 house, also built by the Phelps family, built by Elisha Phelps in 1822, who, as I said, is the nephew of Captain Elisha Phelps, and of course his father Noah ran the Phelps Tavern. He ends up serving in the Connecticut legislature, I think, and then also is he a congressman or just the state legislature? I forget. You guys will have to look it up. It's on the internet, you can find it. So he dies in 1847. He leaves the house to both of his sons-in-law, Amos Eno and John Allen. Amos Eno becomes a real estate magnate. His most well known for building the Fifth Avenue Hotel in New York City in 1859 in an area of Upper Manhattan. People are like, nobody will ever go there. And well, guess what? The city grew up around it and it became hugely popular. Gifford Pinchot, who is Eno's grandson, is born at the 1820 house in 1865. And then it's not until 1875 that he basically buys out his brother-in-law and comes to own the house outright. So I thought that was interesting that it was a shared house for so long. He dies in 1898. He leaves the house to his daughter Antoinette. I couldn't find a good historical photo of the front of the house. So this is I don't know who provided it on Wikipedia, but thank you very much for putting it on there. It's a beautiful shot. And we'll have shots of it later as we go through. So what slide am I on? I don't remember. 15. Yeah, mid-19th century. The mid-19th century, what really starts to change is the coming of the canals, right? It makes Simsbury more connected to the outside world, but those are quickly superseded by railroads, right? Railroad adoption starts in the 1840s, and in 1850, the railroad comes to Simsbury. You do also get, as the population is expanding, children of farmers who are maybe too numerous to inherit the farms that are here are moving westward. So we get westward expansion. We start to get families no longer have the same family living in the same town for 150 years. Now your kids are kind of scattering to the four winds. We also have industrialization, particularly with the company that becomes Ensign Bickford. And then this was an interesting thing for me, the shift in Connecticut, but also in the Northeast, away from dairy and grain production, because the Northeast, particularly New York, Pennsylvania, and parts of Connecticut, were really the breadbasket of the 13 colonies and in the early 19th century. That starts to end in part because of expanded transportation through the Erie Canal and eventually railroads to the Midwest. So the northern plains become the breadbasket of the Americas. But this shift from these more larger staple crops to producing more perishable crops that cannot be transported long distances. So you get dairy production and commercial egg production, and then also orcharding, particularly apples, and what's known as truck farming, right? So that's where you're producing vegetables for local consumption. You also get the rise in the mid-19th century of more community-oriented food activities, clam bakes, church suppers, public picnics, things like that, where you are coming together as a community and eating together. And then these are just some fun images from a description of Connecticut agriculture from 1925. And I like this one. This livestock industry shows how big the beef production was in 1850 down to 1920. And then also you see the rise of dairy. Sheep were also fairly well represented in the mid-19th century, and by the time we get to the 20th century, it's down almost to nothing. We do also have grain production. This is only 1880. So even in the late 19th century, obviously this would have been much larger earlier in the century, but you can see the overall production of everything except tobacco goes down quite precipitously. And same thing also for, you can see sheep are declining, pigs and stay the same, beef, cattle goes down a little bit, and dairy stays largely the same. So just kind of some fun facts and figures to look at. We're going to have, Chris, did you want to talk about
No, it's
agriculture? Were we going to pause at
We
15?
could pause, absolutely, yeah.
Because I'm looking buckwheat. There's a farm. How many people know
Turn
Young's
your
farm,
microphone on.
right? And Young's farm. Yeah, and they do corn, but the cool thing is they do wheat. And I always found that fascinating until Mr. Young, the farmer, said, well, that's what we used to grow here. And I'm like, wait, no, the wheat's grown in the Midwest. And he's like, well, there was no Midwest. and I'm like, oh, yeah, because he's been his family's been here since the mid-1600s, right? And one of the things he grows, as I'm looking, is we get buckwheat from him, buckwheat flour.
Wow.
And he brought that back because that's one of the things his family farmed back then.
Yeah, you'll
Comes full
see
circle.
rye and oats are also very high. So wheat's actually not even on this list, right? Because this is also 1880. So by this point, the majority of wheat production is in the Midwest, right? Because we have post-Civil War, we have a huge rise of railroads. But even pre-Civil War, 1825, the Erie Canal opens up. That opens up the entire Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota grain belt. You have huge silos, grain silos, and flour production in Buffalo as a result of that. But even so, you see there's a pretty precipitous decline of everything except for corn. And the corn is staying constant because you're using that as livestock feed. You're not necessarily consuming it for humans, right? Any other commentary? No? I'm going to keep going. Late 19th century, right, we've urbanized a little bit more. We have access to food from all over the world through steamboats and railroads. And so we have our Gilded Age, which does come to Simsbury, right? We don't quite have robber barons, but we definitely have wealthy industrialists in Simsbury. And so they love to throw lavish dinner parties, and that requires household servants, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about some specifics of household servants. We also have restaurant culture beginning. Prior to this, we do have taverns, inns, hotels have food, railroad dining cars, steamship dining rooms, things like that. But real restaurant culture doesn't really start until the second half of the 19th century. And it's almost exclusively a male province, right?
Interesting.
You can see this is a photo from 1906 at Delmonico's. There's like, I trimmed it so it would fit nicer. There's like 2 women in this picture, right? Here's one of them, and then another one is like over here, off film there. Eating outside of the home was not really considered like the done thing in terms of etiquette for women of a certain class. It does start to change as we get closer to the 20th century. We do also get the development of kind of more women-friendly spaces like tea rooms and, you know, like department store lunch counters, soda fountains, things like that. But really the kind of what we are used to thinking of as haute cuisine starts in this Gilded Age, and that really gives us that's the ancestor of our modern restaurant culture. Let's talk about Ensign House. So 1837 is when the company that eventually becomes known as Ensign Bickford is established at Simsbury. It was an already existing company in the UK that made safety fuses. Starts in Cornwall, I think, right? Cornwall, famous for coal mining and to a lesser extent tin mining. And so safety fuses were invented as a way to make explosives a lot safer for the people who are operating the explosives. But there is a tariff against imports. And the 1830s, what's going on in the United States? Well, we're starting to have westward expansion. We're building canals, right? We're starting to build railroads. We're in a couple of years, it's going to be the California Gold Rush, right? So there's huge demand for dynamite. And so Bickford, which is the British company, decides we're going to build we're going to build a plant in the United States, and they choose Simsbury. Like I said, 1850s, they start... 1860s that should be, they purchase Hot Brook Mill and start producing their own yarn locally. They do also produce flax. They're growing flax locally to produce linen thread as well. Ensign House, so Ralph Hart Ensign inherits the company from his father-in-law, Joseph Toy, and that's when we get the Ensign Bickford company name. And then his son, J.R. Ensign, builds Ensign House in 1906. And then in 1955, the family sells it to the First Church of Christ, which is
right across the street.
Why your lovely dinner attendee ends up having dinner in the chapel she got married in. And this is the house. So, Chris, you want to talk about?
Yeah, that's my favorite picture. I see that every day because of Ika when I come in the building. It's so cool. And I have a cool story about it. I'm standing at the hostess station, and there's a gentleman waiting, for a group to come in, and he's staring at this picture. And I look at him, and I'm like, oh, that's a picture of the house. And he goes, oh, yeah, I know. And I go, and that's, the daughter. Oh, he goes, yeah, I know. And then he looks at me and says, that's my great-grandmother. So, yeah, it was a board of directors meeting for Ensign Bickford, and the family is still involved in the company. Yeah, and he's like, I always like, he goes, I didn't know you had that picture here. That's so cool. All right, where are we?
Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to talk?
Yeah, no, let's.
Let's talk a little bit, because I'm sure some people in the audience will have something to say about this slide. So Ensign House is very wealthy families, very large home. It requires people to operate it. And so Sin and I think the Historical Society sent over some great census records. So the 1920 census, there are a number of servants listed. So we have Julia Wilson, who's a cook, Agnes Meany, who's a waitress, and Fanny O'Meara is the maid. And her brother Cornelius was also a servant in the Horace Belden household, although he's quite a bit older than her. So the O'Meara family were involved in a number of households in service, came from Ireland. They were involved in service here in the local wealthy households. And I think we have another cook-related person in the audience. Chris, you want to introduce them?
How do you pronounce her name? Sabina Glynn and this is her niece. Yes, and she was the cook at the Ensign House in the 40s. Yeah.
Wow.
How cool is that? right? Yeah, and there's a picture
Yes.
you can
Oh, yeah,
see
so hold
afterwards
up,
too.
so
There's a
people
picture
can
of
see.
her.
So she brought a photo
Yeah.
of Savannah.
And I think, if we could stop for just a second, I think that's like when you think about why it's important that this building is a restaurant, where it could have been a number of different things, from homes to condos to everything, is that when it's a restaurant, people get to come in and we get to hear stories, right? And I can't tell you how many times someone comes up to me and says, I went to Sunday school downstairs. Because downstairs, when they built the annex, was the Sunday school. I mean, and that's the cool thing about these old buildings being repurposed now and saved and used for the public to see every day, and we get to hear these wonderful stories.
The other cool thing is that they were all in the census records because they lived on site.
Yeah.
Right? So they had live-in servants as late as the 1920s. That starts to change in American history. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening in the progressive era, and I call it the servant problem. Right? Like, oh, we can't find anyone to be servants in our households. Well, it's because, the nice thing about being a servant is that you have a place to live, and you're usually provided with food and housing, but it's like a 24-hour-a-day job, essentially, and you get like half days off on Sundays or whatever, It's a lot of work, and you don't have a lot of privacy, and your employer has a lot of control over your life. Whereas if you're like a shop girl, yeah, you might have to pay for your own housing, but you work your 8 or 10 hours, and then you're done, and you get your wages right away, and you have a lot more freedom in your life. And so that really starts to shift in the 1920s. And that's why a lot of these, people who are servants at this time period are usually recent immigrants, right? Because they might be from a country where they don't have a lot of skills other than being a servant, or they might come from a family that had a record of service. Like particularly if they're coming from Ireland or the UK, that's like a whole career choice in those areas, and so they're bringing it over here as well.
That's one of my favorite parts of the Ensign House, and it's still there. In one of the rooms, we call it the chef room. It's a small private dining room, and it's not. We don't use it that much, but in that room, it was the butler's office, right? And there's still the call box in it. It's a wooden box, and I assume nothing's inside it now, but I assume that's where the right to call upstairs and call downstairs.
That's
right?
where all the bells would ring.
Yeah, right. We would like tea upstairs now, please.
Yeah, exactly. Has anyone seen Downton Abbey?
Yeah.
Yes, you know exactly what that lifestyle was like, right? All right, so early 20th century, the big impact on restaurants is the rise of the automobile. You start to get car culture. We were talking earlier about, the rise of kind of like tea rooms and little roadside cafes and little roadside taverns, right? All kind of centered around the automobile. People are getting out of their local communities. They need food. They're going on road trips, all this stuff. The 1920s in particular, 1920s and 30s, we start to get the American road trip, right? That's not really a thing prior to that, except for some very intrepid, wealthy people who are like, I'm going to drive across the country, which was a crazy adventure. But you start to get people who are, driving to their summer cottages or driving up to Cape Cod or Maine or wherever they are that they're going, or they just want to go on a trip. And so you start to get restaurant culture reflecting that. I do have a copy of the cover of Duncan Hines' Adventures in Good Eating, which was first published in 1936. Yes, that Duncan Hines, he's famous for box cake mix nowadays. But in his lifetime, he was most famous for these tour guides, and he would review inns and restaurants all over the country. Simsbury is in it. Sadly, it's only the Pettibone Tavern, Pettibone Inn. I was hoping some of the other restaurants would be in there, but they're not. It's just that one. Pettibone Tavern is also in the Gourmet Guide, the 1940s, because I have one at home. Did I bring it? I might have brought it, actually.
So cool.
I think I did.
Whoa.
Yeah. Oh, no, this is the Ford Treasury. Is the Pettibone in this one? I don't remember. I don't think it's in this one. It is in the Gourmet one, though, that I have at home that I could not find when I was going to bring it here. But there's a whole section on Connecticut. These are great if you guys are interested. The Ford ones in particular, because they do illustrations of all of the places. And then often they will have recipes, which is also super fun.
That's amazing.
You also get colonial revival. I kind of touched on that a little bit with the Phelps Tavern, but that is the reason a lot of these historic houses are preserved. It's because starting in the 19-teens and 20s, and then particularly as we're moving through the 20th century, a lot of these places start to get lost. And people are like, hey, these are important parts of our American history. We should keep them. Right, so you get colonial revival. So you get the revival of taverns, right? Pettibone Tavern is kind of the Phelps Tavern. They kind of lean on these historic connections. Particularly in the 1930s, there's a big movement, more so in probably the 70s and 80s, but really in the 30s, this kind of understudied movement to preserve regional foodways. So New England cuisine becomes kind of a thing, right? Also part of travel culture. They're going to experience New England cuisine. And then, like I said, historic preservation. So you also get the expansion of restaurant culture. And that leads us kind of to Antoinette Eno and Eaglewood. Antoinette was probably my favorite character in this in this research. She was a very interesting lady. So she's the daughter of Amos Eno, and she marries Charles Bottonwood. They don't have any children. She's widowed very young. She's like 47 when she's widowed. She's very wealthy. She lives primarily in Washington, D.C. The 1820 house becomes kind of like her summer home. And in the 1890s, after she inherits it, she gives it major renovations, right? The regular pitched gable roof, she changed to a gambrel roof. She put the porch on the back. She put like additions on. The landscaping was done by Frederick Law Olmsted. And she renamed it Eaglewood, and apparently she put eagles everywhere inside of the house. And that was kind of this whole patriotic colonial revival, historic preservation thing that was happening around the turn of the 20th century, that she was interested in American history. She knew it was a historic building. And even though she's like altering it significantly, which we would not do today, she still wants to harken back to that. And so part of that is she starts the Simsbury 4th of July ice cream social. And then just other fun stuff. Big women's suffrage supporter. Like, there was a lot of women's suffrage activity happening in Simsbury, which I also found super fascinating. And then this is her with her cousin, I guess, probably, Gifford Pinchot, at her box at the Washington, D.C. horse races.
So cool.
So,
And that's her. At least I'm pretty sure that's her, yeah.
yeah.
So this is, I don't have a date on this, but this is like the back view of Eaglewood after her alterations. Chris is talking about like, oh, the porch is gone. They want to put the porch back
Yeah, the
on,
porch.
maybe.
That was one of, if we had stayed, that was one of the things we were going to do, was put the porch back.
And then so this is just a couple views of the 4th of July party. Again, undated, but judging by the clothes, around 1905. These are from the Simsbury Historical Society. Another view. This is the bandstand, right?
This is so cool.
I was also trying to figure out what was going on here. Like, was this the ice cream
Yeah, probably.
probably
Oh.
happening?
They had one of the ice houses in town.
Yeah. Oh,
They
kind of.
harvested
Oh,
from
I
the
didn't
pond.
put that in there. Yes. Dang it. That was one of the
Yep.
slides I was going to put in and I didn't. So this pond right here, they did ice harvesting in the summertime, and so they're probably making the ice cream on site
Yeah.
with ice from the pond. So man, probably also local dairy cows. So how much more local can your ice cream get,
Right.
right? So I was very excited to find this stuff because I knew the least about, the 20th century, the late 20th century history of Simsbury House. So in 1948, the town of Simsbury, 1930s, when Antoinette Eno dies, she leaves it to a nephew who never really inhabits it, and then he decides to, he's like in World War II, and then he decides to get rid of it. So the town of Simsbury buys it post-war, and then they sell it to a local group that operates as a restaurant and inn. And that opens in 1949, I know, because I found the newspaper article announcing the hiring of the restaurant manager. So that's kind of fun. And then this was my surprise find. I kept this a secret.
Really?
Yeah, I've got the evidence. So that was so surprised that Simsbury House was not in the Duncan Hines book, but I suppose it's because the earlier ones, maybe it's in the later ones. I didn't look. So he credits Simsbury House for lemon chiffon pie. And then in 1960, the restaurant closes and the building is purchased by the town of Simsbury, and it becomes the 1985. It's renovated as the 1820 house B&B, which is where I'll be staying tonight, which I'm very excited about. So I found this awesome advertisement from 1951, right? So there's the little drawing of the house, right? Continental cuisine, fine vintages, that means wine, right? And then it's also a B&B, right? Individual rooms with bath. You didn't have to share your bath. And then this is my favorite pie.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So in a Texas newspaper, I think this is Duncan Hines had like a syndicated column. Yeah. So he is known for popularizing like chiffon cakes and chiffon pies and stuff, but he is crediting Simsbury House with lemon chiffon pie, which was
amazing.
I like squealed when I found this reference.
We gotta make chiffon pie now.
Now you have to put chiffon pie on the menu.
Yeah. First order of business tomorrow.
I will send you the recipe.
Thank you.
And then you can do it on our show.
Sure.
So I thought we would end on that note.
Wow.
So we'll review our little building timeline, right? We had 300 years from 1680 all the way up to 1985 when the Simsbury House closes. And I did include a couple little other historic Simsbury restaurants that we did not talk about tonight. But the Pettibone Tavern, I found this great photo of from 1928, right? You can see. So these are two restaurants that are very influenced by car culture in the early 20th century. So
Wow.
that's the end of my presentation.
Sarah, that was amazing.
Thank you. All right. I have to close this down.
That was so fascinating. You are such a gift. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Can we really do a lemon chiffon thing
Oh,
on the
yes,
show?
we have
That would
to,
be amazing.
right?
That would make my
We
whole
have to
day.
do some more research, and then we
Right?
have to make the perfect lemon chiffon.
Does-
And that has to be our Simsbury dessert now.
Ru-
Who knew?
How do we make that happen?
I don't know. We have to figure that out, though. But we will figure that out.
Oh my gosh. Well, I was going to ask you what the quirkiest, most beloved facts that you shared them all. That was
I
Yeah.
did. I overshare
I don't know if
sometimes,
it's
but
either
No.
the gin or the chiffon pie.
well, maybe you have to make a lemon chiffon gin cocktail.
Ooh. All right.
You're
Big
gonna put a
things
little
are
asterisk
happening.
with my name on the bottom right.
You get credit, absolutely. I do want to go back to. Does anyone have any questions for Sarah actually before I ask another question of Chris? Yeah.
Where was the gin distillery?
Good question. I can find where I got the information. I don't know exactly where it was, but this is what.
Downstream from Hot Brook,
Yes.
got washed downstream in the floods.
Yeah, so they
55.
there was another mill that was built downstream on Hot Brook Mill from the Hot Brook Mill, right, on Hot Brook. But I guess they got washed away. But it was I think a grain mill that they then turned into a distillery.
The Belden Distillery.
Yes, the Belden family. That's where I think the bulk of their wealth came from. So
Generations.
Gin.
I love that we have local historians here tonight so that they can answer the questions that I don't know the answers to.
The last Belden closed it down because he was a teetotaler and was upset.
Oh,
His gin destroyed.
do you know the date that he shut it down off the top of your head? That's fast. So he got converted by the temperance enthusiasts. That's fascinating.
Oh, sorry.
So sorry. She said the gin distillery was closed by one of the Beldens who was a teetotaler and was upset by the role that gin had played in destroying people's lives. So I said he must have been converted by the Aquatic Society to be a pro-temperance.
The third generation of Belden.
Third generation of Beldens.
Does anyone else have any questions for Sarah?
I'm too thorough, I guess.
No, in the best way. I am so fascinated. But she deserves another round of applause. The work that she did
Thank you.
in putting this together. was so impressive. Yes.
Am I allowed to ask opposed to clapping?
Yes.
25 years, the 1820 house then was closed?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
I've even heard stories from local residents that it was boarded up and they used to break in and go drink beer in there and like leave the high school, right? Sneak out of the high school in the middle of the day and drink beer in the 1820 house. No names will be mentioned.
Makeover team, and we went in and
What?
checked out the possums and the raccoons.
Oh, when you renovated.
And he
Wow.
paid about $3 million.
Sure.
He's a former executive of the Travelers.
Yep.
And he just was in love with the place.
Yeah.
And, but he wanted to put the restaurant in the basement, and we advised against that, because
Yep.
people don't like to go down in the basement and
Yep.
go in a restaurant.
Yeah.
And so the restaurant didn't do very well, and then eventually it moved upstairs where it's.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when we moved in, everyone was like, don't move there, don't move there, don't move there. And it was because the restaurant was in the basement. And we're like, don't worry, that's the first thing we're doing is moving the restaurant upstairs. And that's what we did.
You just think about the stories too. Like, first of all, how lucky we are that you're here today to continue to share that history, but like the Simsbury Historical Society, the
Oh, yeah.
Simsbury Public Library as well. Like the people in this room today, like, you know, we talk about like, you know, bringing folks up here to be able to share a little bit of perspective, but each and every one of you in this room have had some connection to the stories that we've told today. That's so special. I love that. Any other questions? Yeah.
Question, but I have a comment about the Ensign House. I was corrected by old timers in town. Regarding the name of the Ensign House, I was corrected by old timers in town that it's ensign, not ensign, which is the military
Ensign, yes.
designation, because there's no sin in ensign.
Were they also temperance advocates?
It's that simple, I guess. Wow.
It's the ensign.
Yes, I get
Okay.
corrected by anyone who works for the company.
Oh my
It's
goodness.
Ensign.
Oh, we have another.
Yeah, I think we have another question back here.
I know we're talking Simsbury, and I'm a proud new resident of Simsbury.
Welcome.
But I have to go back. Connecticut was settled in the 1630s, not 40s. You have Windsor, Connecticut in 1630, and Wethersfield 6 months later. And to this day, they fight about which is the oldest, but they're both older than Simsbury, just saying.
The more you know.
Very cool.
That's because I'm from New York and we're older, so.
Does anyone else have any other questions? I love this. Yeah, let's keep it going.
Now you got to run around, Chris.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Chris.
Thank you all. I was just curious, Chris, when can we expect the lemon pie?
Oh yeah, no, it's coming. No, seriously, and I like
We're
the
putting you
cocktail
on the
idea
spot.
too.
Oh,
Right?
yes.
A lemon chiffon cocktail.
With gin.
With gin.
Yeah.
Is there
That might come
still
first.
local gin?
No, there's gin in Connecticut, not local to here, but
Yeah.
there's gin in Connecticut. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe you need to do that too.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be before the pie.
Okay.
Guaranteed. Might even be after this.
I was going to say, should we all go to the restaurant and do some recipe testing?
Yes, some gin tasting.
Yes. So yeah, some recipe testing. Yeah. Anyone else? I saw a half raise, maybe. No? I might have just been a little stretch. We need to stretch. That's fine. I would like to go back, Chris. You know, we were talking about local agriculture and how farms like shape menus, and that list was absolutely amazing. But one of the things that I really love about your menus in particular is really just it's so simple yet so elegant, but it's because of the emphasis that you put on supporting these local farms that are surrounding us. You know, we just did a show on CT Live for National Farmers Day, and in chatting with local farmers, I mean, the weather has just had a huge impact on these farms. You know, you see it with some of the pumpkins that are out there. They had to buy pumpkins to ship in because they all had rotted because of the rain. And so, you know, you just think about all of these things, and when you prepare a dish, you're getting it from a neighbor that person is providing that food to you. I mean, talk about that relationship.
And especially in a year like this when it was so hard for farmers. Everyone thinks that owning a restaurant is hard. That is nothing compared to farming. I mean, this year was hard for them, but you know what? We stayed true to it. So what they had is what we used. Do you know what I mean? So if they were short on one thing because the weather didn't produce it, for some reason, that we switched over to whatever they had, and we've always done that. And I think that's, and it's not just me. I think that's how we cook now, and that's how we used to cook, like you said, hyper local, right? Because that's.
I was going to say how 18th century of you.
Yeah. And it's not just because it's hip and it's the way that it's done now. It's because it's fresher and it's better. And we taste the vegetables from different farms, like Holcomb's. How many of you guys know Holcomb Farm? And that is, I don't know what happens on that farm, but the vegetables taste better. We'll get zucchini from Holcomb Farm and slice it up and saute it next to 3 other farm zucchini. And blind tasting, you just know which one's theirs.
I hope those other farms aren't in the room, sorry.
No. It's just these farms, each one's produce things so well.
It's the terroir.
Yeah, and then you look at like Young's farm, and I keep going back to that one because he's one that was a dairy farm, and dairy's not doing well right now, and so he converted and started doing grains. And that's not something we had as chefs in this area. Like, we get cornmeal, local cornmeal, right? Local wheat. He grows 2 different kinds of wheat, summer wheat, and I can't remember the other one. But yeah, and buckwheat. And that's how our menus are developed, from the farm first. And then we say, okay, what can we do with it?
Well, even when you look, I thought it was interesting when you were chatting about, the rise in kind of restaurant culture, right? I feel like we really take restaurants for granted right now, but it's so interesting to see how you kind of, showed that history and how it was celebrated. And I don't know if you have any perspective on like what you think the future has in store for us in terms of the way in which we dine out.
Yeah, so if you look at human history, individuals cooking in their own homes is actually a pretty short section of human history. Like if you go back to the ancient world and stuff, a lot of the big cities in like ancient Rome, ancient Greece, Persia, the Middle East, most people are not cooking at home because they can't afford to, right? You don't have kitchen facilities. And this is true up until really the 20th century. Even in tenements in the big cities, you didn't have necessarily cooking facilities in your little room that you rented in a garret, So you had to eat from push carts, you had to eat from delis and stuff. And I think, on the one hand, there is this push to return to kind of home cooking, but it's a lot of work. And it takes time and effort and skill, and not everybody has that. So I like to think that the future is maybe going to be, more like not necessarily very beautiful, maybe not particularly affordable. I don't know. I haven't got to a restaurant. I don't think we can all afford to eat out at Metrobees every day. But maybe something where it's more like community kitchens or more communal access to food. That's not necessarily what our current restaurant culture is.
And I think you've shed light on it a little bit, but to tie it all back in, you could build a restaurant anywhere, right? Like how has using these buildings here in Connecticut, these historic buildings that have so many stories to be told, like adding your own piece of history to that, like how has that changed the way that you approach your job every day?
It definitely changes the way I cook in each building. I cook differently at the Ensign House than I did at the 1820 House, and different from when I was at the Little Place. I just feel different, right? When I'm in the building, I feel different. I see different things, and it inspires me in different ways to do different things. And I do research. Like, this was something I got turned onto when I was at the 1820 House. And it's a book by the Daughters of the Revolution, which is still in existence. And these are recipes from 1907, right? I mean, that I would never, like before I came to, I would never look at a book like this. And maybe look at it for fun, but not look at it and actually make recipes from it. And we did a whole dinner from this book. And then when we do these dinners, that stuff ends up on our menu, ends up in our cooking style. Mm-hmm. So we're definitely influenced by the buildings we're in.
Do you know how difficult the process is to renovate or like upgrade some of these historic buildings? Because I can imagine there's a lot of rules and regulations that you have to follow.
So it It depends. So I'll let you in on a little museum historic preservation secret, which is that even if a building is not on the National Register, doesn't actually restrict what you can do with the inside of the building, which is sometimes great if you're trying to repurpose the building, but sometimes can be bad if the building gets, like totally gutted. It is quite expensive. There are, because we now as a society care about historic structures, there is funding and tax support for repurposing. I am personally of the opinion that the best way to care for our historic structures is to use them. And also the greenest building is a building that's already built. Right. So there's this big movement in historic preservation to think about historic buildings as ecologically friendly, because building new is it can be very expensive, but it's very environmentally not friendly, right? And also a lot of modern building techniques, because building new is so expensive, they're designed to be cost effective and not to have longevity. So a lot of these historic buildings were built to a different standard. Sometimes that standard is bad if they're not up to code. But in terms of the longevity of the building, they've already survived this far. Making sure that they're kept up is just going to ensure their survival for longer. And also all of that energy has already been expended. So
The history in our building makes it so amazing, right, Ika? I mean, when we walk into the first floor of the Ensign House, that is the Ensign House, because it was a home, a private home, and then it was given to the church. And I always say they really didn't do much to it, right? I mean, they lived upstairs, they used it as offices and Sunday school, but they didn't gut it. They didn't like pull the floors out, or, oh, I don't like the kitchen color, or they didn't do anything. And then it got turned into a bank. And I always amazed that the bank didn't do much either. They must have just walked in and said, it looks good to us, right? Where as you saw in the 1820 house was renovated, and she did it, and then they did it again in the 80s, and they gutted it. I mean, a lot of it's original, but they gutted it and made it new, where we are so fortunate that the Ensign House is the way it is. I walk around that building every day just amazed. I open and close the pocket doors because I cannot believe, right? If you've ever been in the building, on the old side of the house, there's a dining room on that side, and then there's a little entryway, and then there's where Joseph Ensign's office was. That's our little dining room in the corner. And in between those rooms are these wooden pocket doors that were installed in 1906, and they still work. I had Anderson sliding door installed at my house, and 6 months later I had trouble with it. And I'm going, I have sliding doors at work from 1906 that work better than these. But we're fortunate. The floors are original, the moldings, and when they did the renovation, they kept true. The windows are, right? Everything is original to when they built that house. That's why it's such a special place. And that you could come in and see it like almost like a museum, but have dinner there is so, to me, it's so amazing.
Well, and I think that's also a testament to the fact that it was in continual use.
Yes.
Right? So the 1820 house had to be gutted because it was
Left
abandoned.
alone for a while.
Right? Whereas when there's continuing use, it doesn't matter what the use is, as long as the person who is using the historic structure is taking care of it, it's going to be in so much better shape, and you are going to be able to maintain those, the historic character of the building.
The floors on the old side were installed in 1906. I walk on them and go, I cannot believe these are in that good a shape.
Chris, I have to tell you, my museum, those floors that at my museum were installed in the 1700s.
Right?
And we walk over them every day.
Yeah. And you think
what are we doing wrong now, right?
No, and I think that goes back to what you were asking about cooking. I mean, I walk around that building every day, and the imagination is such a wonderful thing. And sometimes I'll sit on the porch and have my coffee and think, like, what was Simsbury like? Sitting here, like Joseph Ensign was sitting here drinking his coffee in 1907, just like I'm sitting here. Yeah. And what was he? He was looking at Route 10, and I'm just. So you think back on what life was like back then, and that does. Then I go in and cook for the day, and that does influence how I cook.
Even going back to like the ice cream socials, just how much society has evolved and changed. It's incredible. Yeah. What's the weirdest thing that you found when you were moving in and
or even
making
the renovation,
the place your own, or during the renovation? Yeah.
What did we find? Didn't we find something in the wall upstairs?
Yeah, at the very top gable.
Yeah.
overlooking the back of the
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, hold on. We'll get you a microphone.
From one of the priests or the reverends were living there. Oh yeah, here's the mic.
Here you go.
So every,
So at the very top gable point overlooking the back of the property, we found a cross up there, which
Yeah.
was probably maybe from the church's time or whatever. We found a rum bottle up in the rafters
must have been the staff.
and
or
just
maybe a relative.
because the construction went through the winter, so I'm sure they needed to be kept warm a little bit. But and then we also found 2 batteries that are on the. There's the historic register of batteries. We discovered it's like
Yeah.
the first batteries. They were.
Oh,
for.
so they're like liquid, like
Yeah.
lead acid batteries?
No, they're like big, like
Yeah.
water bottles.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so they're big ceramic
Right.
cylinders with like a.
and we left the
Cool.
cross right where it was.
Very cool. Yeah.
And then we found the tag that to the cold water pipe. It said to Mr. and Mrs. Ensign's bathroom, cold. The cold water pipe. So that was pretty cool because then we figured out exactly where the bathroom was, and then of course, then that explains this tile wall. And so-
Yeah. So
not quite weird, but interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to know about the railroad. The railroad station was across the street and down sort of where it is
Yeah, where
now.
Plan B is now, right?
Yeah.
One-way fare. Yeah, Plan B now. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it seems like it's far from the restaurants. So, and I guess there was probably a track that went to the factory too.
sure.
And I just wonder what kind of traffic you
I
had, and
think
whether there were diners.
I think this is something I learned when I came to town, that our idea of distance has changed from the 1600s
Yeah.
and 1700s, right? What you think of as down the street now was a lot further, I think, back then. And you walked, right? Or you
Yeah.
took a horse, or right?
A lot of people
Yeah.
walked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's when you're saying we think about distance.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's only a short car ride, but man, we don't want to have to walk
Yeah.
to the other end of the
Yeah.
parking
We-
lot, right?
We've heard stories from people at the company that said, people used to stay at the Ensign house, like guests of Joseph, and they would spend the night from Hartford because it was too. You'd have dinner in Simsbury, but you couldn't make it back to Hartford at night. And I'm like, wait, you couldn't. Yeah. So they would stay the night because Hartford was so far away that if you came to Simsbury for dinner, you had to spend the night.
Well, and also if you think about it, if if you don't have a car, your carriage probably doesn't have headlights,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's no street lights, so
Yeah.
You're not wrong. Oh, that's funny. Well, before you take give the mic back, do you want to share, because before you were speaking on the mic about your story and your connection in this photo here, we talked about it a little bit, but I just think it would be great if you maybe shared a little more insight and why it was important to you to share that tonight.
Oh, well, yes. My Aunt Bina, Savina Glenn, was
can
the...
you put them
Oh,
right close to your mouth? Thank
my
you.
Aunt Bina was the cook for the Ensigns. I know she was there in 1943. We have pictures of her with my baby sister, and I think she was probably there a few years before that. Maybe she followed that woman that you listed.
Yeah,
as-
Julia, yeah.
From Ireland.
yeah, and of course she was from Ireland, and I guess through the network they would find out about jobs. She lived there, so she was a resident servant. She probably started out as a maid in other places, but she trained herself to be a cook, and by reading books. She mentions the Boston. Fanny Farmer's Boston Cookbook. That might have been one of her textbooks. But I don't know what else I can say. We used to come over the wooden bridge to pick her up on Sundays, which is her day off, and she was.
And you still have her cookbook,
oh,
right?
yes, in the kitchen. I remember.
Oh, the kitchen was downstairs.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember.
hold it close to your mouth.
Yeah, I remember walking through the kitchen, and I was astonished by the huge black stove that was in the alcove that Chris showed me. So she cooked on that, and so I must have been about 5 years old, so that would have been 50 maybe. So
Wow.
however she
So
was there.
cool.
After she left there, she went to the Darlings house because there was an intermarriage between the ensigns. So that maybe that's why she went to Mr. Darling's house.
That was part of the company too, right?
Yeah, I guess. And and we have I have some recipes, but I'm not sure that they were used, at the Ensign house. But she had written out some recipes for me, which she was a wonderful cook. We even after she retired and she had an apartment in Hartford, we would be invited there for Sunday dinner. It was just the most wonderful food. She was a real chef. She would have been called a chef now instead of a cook.
So, Chris, the other Chris, scanned some of the images from the cookbook, and there's little notes. Are those notes written to you?
Yes, I guess.
Oh
so,
my
yeah.
gosh, that's
yeah.
wonderful. So there's little notes about like, oh well, this is the pound cake. I make half of this recipe when I make pound cake for you, or this is the fruit cake that you really liked. Like just the sweetest notes.
Well, I was living in Boston, and I wrote to her for some recipes, and that's where I got those handwritten recipes. So. But yeah, she, whenever she came to our house, she always brought with her something wonderful, and a pound cake or a fruit cake or something. Yeah.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I love
Glad
that.
to.
I don't know how are we doing on time? We okay?
We're good. Yeah, there's about 8 minutes. 8 minutes before 8. So.
8 minutes for questions. I don't know.
Can we do it? Yeah.
Two questions, please, Chris. When I first moved to Connecticut 30 years ago or so, I remember going to a small restaurant in Granby, I think on Route 10 in a little strip mall, and I think that might have been the original Metro Beast.
Yeah, it was called Metro Kitchen.
Okay.
And the history is I don't know if anyone knows the old owners, Claude and Kathy. Claude's family actually had the company that refurbished the Paris Metro in the 60s and 70s. The cars were wood back then, and then his company changed them to the stainless steel that they even use today. And he had all that memorabilia sent to the United States, and that's why it's called Metro.
Well, thank you. And
Yeah, and people don't even realize how cool that is. When you come into the Ensign House, when you walk in the main door, just to the right, you'll see 2 subway doors, and those are original Metro subway doors. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so cool.
Chris, also, what drove you to go across the street?
From there to here?
Yeah, to move the restaurant.
Yeah, Ika and showed us the building, and how do you say no to that?
It'd be tough.
It's definitely one of the most beautiful buildings in town, and we were already in a historic building, so we knew how important that was. And we were like, you know what, this place has been here forever. It'll be fine without us. And if we can help that building like we did this building, because when we moved into 1820 House, it was sort of on a slant down a little bit, right? And it wasn't doing that well. The restaurant had been closed for a long time, and you felt the same thing that was going to happen again. And then after 5 years being there, it had this energy again. And we were like, and it still does. There's a restaurant there now. You're staying there tonight. You'll see it's still a beautiful place. And we were like, you know what? We have to do this because this building just needs something like this, and then the whole town can share in it. Yeah.
Do we have another? Do you have a question?
I have a question for you.
Sure. Can we pass the
Oh,
microphone?
I don't think I need the mic.
Oh, okay. Be loud then.
Food trucks seem to have been part of food culture, maybe in part because of COVID. And it almost seems like no one's talking about food trucks now. I don't know if it's because it's approaching winter, but what place do you think food trucks have in the future of going out to eat?
Yeah, so as I'm sure Chris can attest to, one of the biggest expenses of a restaurant is the building. So, I had talked a little bit about, tenements and food carts and kind of like food that's available in small transportable areas. It's been around for centuries, if not millennia. But I think food trucks was a way, particularly during the pandemic, for chefs, particularly new and up and coming chefs. I mean, you can buy a food truck for like $10,000 depending on the quality of the food truck. So whereas a building, I mean, you're gonna spend $2,000 to $5,000 a month on rent. So food trucks, I think, play a really important role in helping people who have new or interesting ideas that they want to try out, people who are kind of up and coming, chefs who want, to control their own kitchen and try out their own cuisine. I think that's a really important step for a lot of people. And I think it's also, food trucks are, people who maybe don't consider themselves chefs, but are cooking food that, is kind of like the lunch crowd, or, they go to like carnivals and stuff. I think that also plays a role because Americans really love to eat not sitting down. Or if they are sitting down, they're in their cars, right? Yep. So yeah, I think these kind of things go in cycles. I think the other benefit of food trucks is you don't have to have as big of a staff, which is the second largest expense, or maybe the first largest expense in running a restaurant. So I think if you just haven't heard about them in the news, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily not around anymore. It just means that our media news cycle has just decided to talk about other things. So I think food trucks are really cool.
Yeah. I think they're the best thing that happened to the food industry ever. Love them. It gives young chefs, right? Like you said, you can start out with almost nothing and experiment and do wonderful things. I always go to, how about people have been down to New Haven near the wharf, and they have all the Puerto Rican, Spanish, Mexican, these food trucks, and the music's playing. 20 minutes in, I find myself dancing, eating tacos. It just,
the other nice
the
thing
atmosphere.
is you can go to where the customers are.
Yeah.
The customers don't have to come to you. You can go to where the customers are. And there are definitely people, I think a lot of really successful food trucks utilize like Twitter and Instagram. Like, hey, today we're going to be here, and in 2 hours we're going to be here, and people, follow them, and if they love a food truck,
They used to do Food Truck Fridays.
Yeah.
Why not? You got to bring that back.
I know. Right now, we actually don't have shows on Fridays. That's part of the reason why we're not doing Food Truck Fridays. So maybe I have to talk to management and say, hey, listen, guys.
Write that down.
There's demand. There's demand. But I would say the majority of the chefs that we bring on the show are just starting out. They're based in their kitchens, and they either just got a food truck, they're just expanding for the first time, and it's more cost effective for them to hit the road and go to an event, or a brewery.
Yeah.
They make incredible money.
Yeah. I go to
Popping up at a
Legitimus in
brewery.
New Hartford once a month on Sundays, and there's the cool thing is it's like a new restaurant every Sunday. Every Sunday at Legitimus on 44, they have a different food truck. Yeah. So one weekend you can have Spanish tapas, the next weekend you have crepes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But do you think that it was during the pandemic that that's when we saw the rise in?
Yeah.
I think food trucks have kind of been on the up and up as property prices have gone up and up. I think that's played a big role. Yeah. And as it's gotten harder and harder to find staff, right, particularly for new people starting out. But I think also we're kind of getting into more niche style restaurants. So like in the 1950s, there was a steakhouse in every town, and they all had basically the same menu. But now we're much more interested in new and unique flavors, and I think as Americans in general, we're more open to trying new things and having different experiences than maybe we grew up with. And I think food trucks can really help facilitate that.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? This has been so great. Oh, back there. Yep. Sorry, Chris.
Project.
Good presentation, so thank you. But I just feel, having lived here for a long time, I'd be remiss if I didn't say you left out a story, and maybe it was by request, about what could have happened to the Ensign House if we didn't have people in town who were so.
Yeah.
And I can just start with that. There was
I just wanted to say, I appreciate our
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, because we keep bringing up the Beldens. That was a beautiful home too, right? And that was before I got here. I don't know how many people here remember the Belden house, but it was on the corner directly across from us. And it was I'd love to see a picture of it someday, but I've heard stories of what an amazing building it was, and we lost it. And we lost it because, like we were saying, it was unoccupied, right? And it wasn't like we wanted to get rid of it. It's just when these buildings stay empty for so long, they fall in on themselves, and then they have to go.
It's demolition by neglect.
Yeah,
is
demolition
what
by
they
neglect.
use in the historic
Yeah.
preservation community. Yeah.
But thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I want to tell them something so that the ladies can look the next time they go to the restaurant, which we hope is tomorrow or the next day. But anyway, they've been in business in 3 different places that I've eaten. And I worked at Country Curtain in Avon for 18 years. So the curtains that are hung at the windows in your dining room now were at the first restaurant. And they're still being sold, by the way, by the Mad Country Store. And they're called Medallion Macrame. And so every time I go in, I think about them, and I told the story. So anyway, then the second restaurant was the 1820 house. So I had the misfortune of having a flood in my condo, so I had to live at the hotel for 4 months. Anyway, so there again, I looked up one day and I said, Courtney, that's the Medallion Macrame again. Yes, it is. So they're moving to the Instant Show. So we're getting ready to go to dinner over there, and I said, no way, they can't fix that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I walked in, and there they are in the main
Yeah. They're the original ones from Metro 1. Courtney is the caretaker of the curtains, we call her. Because they're older now. Because we inherited them from the first owners.
Wow.
If you ever need to replace them.
Yeah.
are selling a lot of the Country Curtain stuff, and I told him, and finally he said to me, where are you from? I said, I'm from Simsbury, Connecticut. And he said to me, would you be interested in a job?
Oh, I
So
love
we're not
that.
only preserving buildings, we're also preserving historic textiles.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was important for us to, when we moved each time, the fear of not making it is always in the back of your head. So we wanted to bring something with us with each move. And it was, Courtney was like, well, what's gonna come with us? And of course, the subway doors have to, because that's the name of the restaurant. And then the curtains were just one of those things and some people hate them and some people love them, but they're there. Oh, wait, before we go, since we mentioned this book, because I'm a chef, I made chowder. 1907 version. So if you want to taste some clam chowder, don't leave yet. They're going to hand it out any minute, right? Yes. So if you've had this book, we're having the 1907 version of the New England clam chowder.
But thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate your time.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.